Hello, and welcome back to another video. I am Reshikrom.
Oh, hello.
Today, as the title and thumbnail probably suggests, we're going to be talking about probably one of the decks that has the most potential, but isn't the most obvious what version will eventually win out. We're going to be talking about Reshikrom and Zekrom. This video is basically one of a series of videos that I do for any new deck. This is the sort of meta-analysis explanation of how this deck works and runs. I'm not going through every card. There's a separate deck profile where I will go through every card in the version that I have built. That's also not to say that the version that I built is the best. It's still very early. But that's the point of this video, is not to say that card for card, this is the deck that you should build, but in this version of the deck, how does this deck work? What are its weaknesses? What are its strengths? What are the key cards, etc.? And how does it fare in the meta as a whole? So, look out for those other videos, the deck profile and a video that we actually test this deck out as well. Look out for those. They'll be in the links and all that stuff somewhere. So let's get into it. The first card, and the one that's the most obvious, what this whole deck is built around, is Reshikrom and Zekrom. Oh my gosh. Focus up. All right. Reshikrom and Zekrom. Beautiful card, in my opinion. The alternate art is particularly beautiful, in my opinion. But this card, this card. You probably know about it. You probably heard about it. But its first attack, Fabled Flare Bolts, does 90 times damage. It does 90 damage for each energy that you discard from your benched Pokemon. That's critical. The energy that you discard from your benched Pokemon, either fire or lightning, doesn't matter, but it has to be either of those. You can't have other random energy. For each basic fire or lightning that you discard from your bench, it does 90 damage. Now, you can only discard up to 3. So this one does max out at 270 damage. Very important to know. It maxes out at 270 damage, which will come into play as I talk about this in the meta later. But 270 damage knocks out most tag teams. The only exceptions are the new Space Dogs, Arceus, Dialga, Palkia, the new Naga and Guzzlord, also 280 HP. Then you've got Mega Sableye and Tyranitar, 280 HP. You have Wailord and Magikarp at 300 HP. The Triple Birds at 300 HP. Those two not really relevant in the format, but the other three very relevant. There might be another 280 HP plus Pokemon that I'm missing, but for now, there's a few out there. There's more. They printed a couple in this set, I think knowing that this was coming out for that reason. But the second attack, which is the GX attack, which you may use sometimes, you may not use most times. So the second attack is GX is called Cross Break. For 2 fire and 2 lightning energy, you do 170 damage to one of your opponent's bench. And if you played Ends Resolve this turn, you do 170 damage to another of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Now, you're doing damage, you're not placing damage counters, so it's important to remember with this GX that Mew means you're not doing anything. So if your opponent has a Mew on the bench and you have no way of getting it into the active and knocking it out, or knocking it out through some other means, you have no GX attack this game. That's with this card at least. So in certain matchups, it's great. In other matchups, it's never going to be used. If you do run End Resolve at least one in your deck and you can manage to find it on the turn that you need it and get it off, yeah, like you could take out 2 Dedennes or a Dedenne and an Oricorio, or 2 Pokemon on the bench that have 170 or less HP that are GXs or prizes in one turn. Feels really good. I don't think most people are going to be doing it that often because it's just finicky. Getting 1 2-prizer like that might be the difference between the game and the loss, so that's totally fair. That's why you don't need End Resolve in a build to still get some value out of this. But the fact that it stops so hard by Mew, one Mew, I think makes that GX attack actually a lot weaker. So I would say this card, focus on the first attack. That's really what this whole deck is built around. Now, There's a bunch of different engines that are being tested for this deck. Personally, I'm not saying it's the best, but I think this might be the one that wins out in the end. I don't know though. The Naga build. So the Naga build, if you don't know, Naga charges up energy from your discard. So anything in your discard, you can use charging up, attach 1 energy to this Pokemon. So if you have 2 of these on the bench, or even 3, you have 2 of these means 180 damage, so long as you have 2 energy in your discard every turn. And then if you attach once per turn to a bench Pokemon, boom. Every turn, you potentially have 270 damage with this. Like, that's such an easy way to get crazy damage. That's why I think this build is probably the best build. That said, there are turbo builds that are being considered, builds that play lots of Ends Resolve, or builds that play Welders and B-Strings. But for me, I think I'm playing it a little more conservative and using that deck space to use other cards. So, Naga is the other card that I think is really important for the version that I'm talking about. So the question is, how are we getting energy onto the board? How are we finding our energy, etc.? So, in terms of supporter lines, these are the main supporters in the version that I'm talking about. This is a Welder and Volkner engine deck. So obviously, Volkner, attach up to 2 fire energy to your Pokemon, to 1 Pokemon. You can Welder to your Reshikrom for 1, you can Welder to your Reshikrom for 2. You can Welder to your bench for 2, and then attach to your Reshikrom, right? There's a lot of flexibility with this Welder, and obviously you draw cards. So it's not only acceleration for your energy, but draw. I imagine that every deck that is going to be in this format will use a Welder for this deck, every version. So now, the difference between, I think, this deck and some other decks might be whether or not you choose to play Volkner. Now, you'll see in the deck profile that I chose to play Volkner because I'm also playing things like Dedenne and Zeraora. So I can go grab a Lightning Energy, and then I can go grab any trainer card that isn't a supporter or a stadium. I can go grab any of those, and sometimes early game, if I get it off, it's an electromagnetic radar, kind of like a Pikarom. Sometimes, if it's late game and I need to find my Tapu Koko, I'll go and grab a Pokemon Communication to find that. Sometimes I need to find an energy switch or a tag switch or a switch. A lot of flexibility with this card depending on when you get it. So those are the 2 main supporters I think that really round this deck out and make it very viable and flexible. Another card that I think is really important for this deck is you're going to be doing 270 damage, right? You need a beefy target that you can take out with all of that power, which is why this deck needs great catchers. It's a low-cost way to bring something up on the bench that your opponent is trying to hide from this beast, and say, I'm going to do big damage, and I'm going to do it on the Pokemon I want. This deck has to be in control as much of the game as possible. You're putting serious pressure on, and without Great Catcher, there's no pressure, right? I can just feed you 1 prizers until I'm ready to knock you out. So that's another thing about this deck. This deck has got to put pressure on fast. Otherwise, you have a 3-prize Pokemon potentially just sitting up there saying, please come knock me out. I would love that. So the next 2 cards that I think the next 2 sets of cards that I think will round out what this deck probably needs based on the meta. The first is Choice Helmet. Now, I think a lot of GX and specifically tag team GX decks that have Pokemon with 260 to 200 or plus, 260 plus. I think if you're a Pikarom with 240, you don't bother with this card right now. But most tag team GX decks need to start playing at least 1, maybe 2 Choice Helmets, and a way to go find them. Which would be like a thing like Guzma and Hala. And the reason I have this in my deck is obviously, I think this deck is going to be very popular. I think it's going to be running around. I don't want to get into a mirror match where I get 1-hit KO before I can take my knockout. So I'm going to try to find this as early as possible so that there is almost no way that this guy is getting 1-hit KO'd by itself, basically. that's why this Choice Helmet is in here, and that's why I think a lot of decks should probably start running Choice Helmet. Now, this next set of cards is probably interesting and different. You might have thought about this, you might have seen some people talk about this, but I haven't seen too many people mention it yet. And that is Drampa, which is a new dragon card that came out. Don't worry about its first attack really, but its second attack is pretty good. Dragon Arcana for 3 colorless energy says if it has 2 different types of basic energy attached to it, it does 140 damage instead of 70. Let me see if I can get that to focus up. Yeah. Now, having 3 energy cost and having them have to be 2 different types of energy, you could weld her for 2, attach 1, and then this one's off to the races in 1 turn, which is good. Secondarily, 140 is a really good number. You're knocking out Giratinas, you're knocking out Volcanians, you're knocking out Kyogres, you're knocking out a lot of really good 1-prize Pokemon with 140. And depending on your situation, you can clean up a Pokemon that is needing to be double, hit twice. It also goes through Keldeo, which is another thing about this deck that initially you're like, wait, if you're only attacking with Reshiram and Zekrom, doesn't Keldeo just auto-win? Or if you're going up against a Gardevoir and Sylveon, doesn't that with a Dragon Charm just auto-win? Well, no, you've got Naganadel, 1, and now you've got this. Now, the other card that goes along with this, which is pretty spicy, not really that spicy, but it's necessary. If you're gonna play Drampa, you should play at least one of these. Dragonium Z came out in this set. I think if you were, focused on the Unified Minds, you might have seen Flyanium Z, and I don't know, they had 2 Z cards in there that were items that you attached. They were garbage. No, don't play those. This is one you can use. Now, it can only be attached to it can only be usable if it's attached to a Pokemon that has the attack Dragon Claw. This card has Dragon Claw. Now, what it allows you to do is do a GX attack with this Pokemon. And this GX attack is the best GX attack for the energy cost in the game. Seriously. For 3 colorless energy, it does 80 times damage. Discard all basic energy from this Pokemon. This attack does 80 for each card you discarded in this way. There is no cap to this. So, 3 energy of any type, and you're doing 240 damage for 3 energy. That's already insane. Attach 1 more energy, you're doing 320 damage with a non-GX Pokemon. Meaning, things that are running Choice Helmet do not get affected by this. You just do 320 damage straight up. Things like Lucario Melmetal, anything that has reduces your damage that you take, plus a Metal Frying Pan or something else. So say it's negative 60. This with 4 energy does 260 damage still. So that is literally exactly what you need to knock out a Lucario and Melmetal that has a Metal Frying Pan. So this is a really awesome set of cards. And I think in a number of games, this might actually end up being the GX attack that you end up using. Because it's gonna really fix a lot of math for you. It's a 4 energy card that OHKOs anything. It's absolutely broken. It's just a busted card for 4 energy. No other Pokemon does 320 damage for 4 energy. Done. I've said enough about it. So, those are the, what I would call the key parts of the deck. There's a lot more in this deck. It's a totally new archetype. It's kind of a mashup between Pikarom and itself, sort of. So, if you're familiar with Pikarom, there's going to be parts of this version that run very much like Pikarom. But yeah, I think if we really think about the weaknesses of this deck, let's get into that now. I have found, and this might simply be that the actual proper profile of the deck that's the best has not really emerged yet. I have found that you get really awkward hands with this deck. You get really clunky hands. So you'll get a hand that's I don't know what to do with this. I think the key with that is to remember that this deck does all of its heavy lifting with energy on the field, right? You generally do not need things in hand to do lots of damage. Once you're set up on the board, getting set up, I think then you need to look at this deck and just say, I will do what I need to get through the deck as fast as possible. Once you get set up, just burn through this deck. That means the Denes, you could put Acrobikes in. You know, there's a lot of cards that you can put in, but you want to just get set up, get some energy into your discard, and then burn through this deck so that you're not sitting there with not enough cards in hand and you're not set up. So that's something I think that is important to remember, that even though your hand might feel pretty clunky at times, if you have options to get rid of it, to switch out your hand, etc., take them. In terms of the deck's weaknesses outside of that, I mean, look, you're running, 3 prize Pokemon. You're running, okay, so actually here's one. Guardian is going to be popular. It still is popular. It will continue to be popular. You are getting hit for weakness with Fairy. That could end up being a real problem. You might see versions of this deck emerge that play weakness guard energy because of that. Because you're sat there thinking, okay, I keep running up against Guardian, and so I think the more of this you see that don't play weakness guard energy, the more Guardian you see, right? Like, it's a balancing act in the universe. So I think that's what'll happen. I think you'll start to see both of those deck archetypes start to creep up, and then somebody will find a way to outmaneuver the other. Probably Reshiram and Zekrom will outmaneuver Guardian with things like a weakness guard energy. And then you'll see Guardian calm down, and it'll just be this thing where, like, the less Guardian, the less weakness guard, and the more. So that's one big thing, is its weakness, is its literal weakness. I think another thing this deck might suffer from is if you don't get set up properly. I think similar to Blacephalon, Giratina, any deck that requires a decent amount of Dark Box even, any deck that requires a lot of setup to really get running, if you donk early game, you don't get set up, sometimes this deck doesn't have a lot of options to get you out of that. You just lose. So there are things in this deck that help it avoid that, like Dedenes, electromagnetic radars to find them, Volkners to go get the electromagnetic radars. So the one that I have built is really hedging against not getting set up early game. And I think that's kind of what you need to do. Whether it's the turbo or this version, you need a version that's going to get you to see enough cards quickly early game so that you can get set up regardless. But yeah, obviously if you donk, you donk. Most decks have that problem, but I think setup decks like this particularly suffer from that. In terms of the meta and where this deck is really going to fall into the meta, it could very easily be tier 1 based on the amount of damage that it outputs. Also based on the flexibility of the deck, right? You can attack with Naganadel if you need. You have Drampa. You can run Turtonator in this deck. There's a lot of Pokemon that can take advantage of all of the mechanics already inherent to this deck style. So you have a lot of OHKO Pokemon. You have both GX and non-GX one-hit KO Pokemon. Yeah, I think this deck is very much a contender for tier 1, maybe even best deck in the format after it all comes out. But outside of that, yeah, any fairy deck, if you're not running weakness guard, is going to be tough for you. Trying to think of what else would be a struggle for this deck. It's tough. You don't run at this moment custom catchers. So I don't know if Malamar would be tough for this deck. It might be. The new Malamar is going to be very good. If you get some damage onto your Pokemon and you don't have a way to heal it, and you go to your bench, things like Esper are going to wreck you. You're going to have a bad time. I think this deck likes to have, 2 Reshiram and Zekrom set up, which means you have 2 Pokemon that your opponent only needs to knock out. So if your opponent can manage that, Great Catcher, that's what I was going to say. Great Catcher is a potential problem for this deck because Reshiram and Zekrom have a 3 retreat cost. If you don't find the switches you need, if you get Great Catchered into the active with no way to get out and no energy on, your opponent could potentially stall you a turn. Not more than that probably, but just a turn is all they need. And that'll put you in a position where if they knock that out, then you've only got one Reshikrom and Zekrom left. Yeah, it can be awkward. Outside of that, it's going to be hard to say what the meta is really going to unfold. But we'll see. We'll see. Let me know what you think about Reshikrom and Zekrom. What version do you like? Do you like Naga? Do you like Turbo with end resolves? Is there some other version I'm not even thinking about? But yeah, let me know what version of the build you're excited to build. And yeah, check out the deck profile that I'm going to have up near now. Sometime might be a link in the description. So check out that deck profile to see the exact deck that I'm working with right now. And check out the battle video that we do with this deck, where I'm going to use this deck against a friend of mine's deck. Should be some good stuff. So you'll get to see how it actually runs and maybe even see how clunky this deck can be. I don't know, I haven't done that video yet. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe. Let me know what you think, and I will catch y'all in a later video. Carpe awesome.